Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. We're going through a tumultuous period in America, and it's always great to have a voice of wisdom and clarity to help us make sense of it all. I'm fortunate to have as my guest one of the clearest thinkers in America, the celebrated economist Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs is the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. He's also a senior UN advisor and an expert on sustainable development. Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for those nice words.
So we are in a strange moment in America right now. It's almost as if the society is becoming unhinged. We have like this strange candidacy of Donald Trump's. We've had the terrible police shootings, shooting of the police in Dallas, and also shootings captured on video by the police. We have mass shootings, it seems like almost every week or so. As Marvin Gaye might say, what is going on? Are things really as bad as they seem, or are we maybe going through a little bit of media overreaction?
I think Americans don't feel very good about things, so I don't think it's just the media saying it. I think it's really a feeling in the country. We're also probably not alone, because we see a lot of turbulence in other places as well, a lot of deep divisions, this Brexit in the UK, voting to get out of Europe, but that reflected a lot of anxiety, not just a specific vote about the European Union. And what the Americans say overwhelmingly is we're on the wrong direction. They don't agree on what the right direction is, but they do say we're absolutely on the wrong direction. I think the underlying trends that we see are also not good ones, in the sense that the one thing that has gone up on average is the economy, just measured as output per person. But just about everything else does seem a bit odd. Yes, the economy's rising, but it's all going to the top. The gaps between the rich and the poor have been widening now for 30 years. The sense of trust in society, which I think really is a subtle, important measure of what's going on. People say we don't trust other Americans, and you see year after year, opinion survey after opinion survey, that going down. Americans don't trust government. We're at the rock bottom level. Americans don't trust big companies. And by the way, there's lots of good reason for all of this. So I think what's happening is not just a media overreaction. It is a sense that the social fabric really is getting frayed. It's somehow we're pulling apart.
And in this lack of trust that you're talking about, we see it so clearly in Washington, you know, where the Democrats and the Republicans, I mean, not only can't they get together on issues, but there's a level of hostility that I haven't been used to seeing over a lot of years of covering politics.
The ugliness of the public discourse is just incredible. You know, after the police shootings, Mayor Bill de Blasio made a statement that was a very sensitive statement, I thought. He said a parent of a child of color has to be worried, has to be afraid in this country right now. The head of one of the police unions immediately said, he's lost his mind again. What kind of reaction is that? Maybe you could say, maybe the mayor doesn't have it right, or we need... The mayor's lost his mind again. This is the rancor. It's exhausting, it's troubling, it's debilitating to society. And so that's part of what's out there. I don't go to Washington anymore. I'm involved in politics in many ways. I cannot stand to go to Washington, because what do you do there? You might meet some lobbyists, but nothing will get done.
You don't achieve anything.
No, so there's no reason actually to go there. It's not as if anything you do is really going to make a difference. So in that sense, it's another, I think, part of this reality that we are polarized, hostile, nasty to each other in an unbelievably nasty election year. And people are shooting each other. And even when the data may say, well, the overall trends are looking better, I looked recently, I was surprised that the homicide rates have come down, of course, in this country. We know that. But the rate of violent crime has not come down, and the number of mass shootings is certainly rising a lot, and the number of assault weapons in circulation is soaring unbelievably. So this is a very troubling time.
You mentioned the economy and how even, I guess economic growth has been, it's been going up, but it's been somewhat sluggish. But nearly all the benefits go to the top, whatever percentage, 1% or whatever the percentage might be. It's the inequality that we hear so much about. You've talked about how economic issues are always tied up with politics and government. So can you talk a little bit about the economic state of affairs that we're facing right now, especially as it affects ordinary working men and women, and how that's in the context of politics and government over the past several years?
A starting point is that America is a rich country. If you look at the total output of our country, about $19 trillion in a year for 325 million people, that's a lot of income, and it's at an all-time high. If you look at the gaps between the rich and the poor, that's also at an all-time high. If you're a working class family, the likelihood is you haven't seen a rise of incomes for decades, and perhaps you've experienced a lot of turbulence of job loss, your company closing down, jobs going overseas, cuts of wages, cuts of benefits. And at the same time, just today was the recent release of the bankers' compensation for 2015. And it's $10 million, $25 million, $30 million of people who have run criminal organizations from my point of view, because these are companies, they're the marquee companies, JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, different Sachs, very different Sachs.
Not related.
Yes, and what these companies have been paying one mega fine after another for breaking the law, for financial fraud, for violating financial standards, and yet the CEOs at the top are in these mega compensation schemes. And I've called this an age of impunity, in that not only are the rich very rich and getting richer, but they're able to do almost anything and get away with it right now, and they know it, and the rest of us have been watching for years and saying, what is going on with this? And so there's this sense, I think, of a lot of unfairness in the society, and a political system that just isn't interested or capable of addressing it. Too much money in politics, and I have voted Democratic Party all my life, and I do think that the Republican Party is much worse on this. But I have no love for my own party in this, because money is the key in the Democratic Party the same way. Big money, big bucks, Wall Street, big contributors. So that's why there's a lot of alienation.
So we're in the midst of a presidential election, which is ordinarily the way for ordinary citizens to seek redress and change if that's what the voters want. The polls show, however, that the voters are not happy with either candidate selected by the two major parties. Of course, it's Donald Trump and it's Hillary Clinton. So let's talk about that a little bit. I'd like you to sort of critique the candidates, and let's start with Trump. I mean, I'm surprised, as many people are, that he's gotten as far as he has, but there he is. So what do you think of the Donald Trump candidacy?
Well, it is a phenomenon of reality TV, which of course is unreality TV. This guy was an icon on reality TV, and that carried him a long way. And then he's played on the ugly side of our politics, and he's quite the narcissist. So this is an unstable person who has no business being a candidate for president. I join in with many other Americans feeling a bit horrified that he is candidate. But he could win, and he's got nearly half the support, because the race is really about unfavorability.
Right.
On the other side, unfortunately, I supported Bernie Sanders during the campaign, because I really liked what Senator Sanders was saying, which is that we have to get money out of politics, that we need a new approach. He espouses a kind of ideology that I share. I call it social democracy. It's what you see in Sweden or Denmark or Norway, which I regard as the most functional places on the whole planet, actually, in how their economies work and how fair their societies are. And for me, Hillary Clinton represents the status quo. Now, the status quo compared to Donald Trump is something I'm gonna vote for.
Right.
But she has been in two ways very distressing for me. One is on the domestic economic side. It's a kind of center or even center-right politics, actually, with big backing from Wall Street, because it was Bill Clinton who made the deft political maneuver, but I think a rather disastrous fact for America, bringing Wall Street and the Democratic Party together in 1992. It won him the election, but I think it created a huge mess for our country. At the same time, Hillary Clinton, unfortunately, represents another thing which I find extremely problematic for us and all linked into our problems, and that is she's been for every war that's come along. So we really do have a military-industrial complex of the kind that Dwight Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell address in early 1961. It's there. It proposes war after war, and she says, I'm with you, let's go for it. And that has gotten us Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya. And so we're at war abroad. We're at war at home almost with the amount of guns, mass shootings we have. You can't feel that this is really, you could say, of course, I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I can't even imagine the alternative. But on the other hand, this is not going to solve America's problems. And so we need a change that's more fundamental than this.
One of the cornerstones of Hillary Clinton's campaign is that the American economy did very well, even great, when Bill Clinton was president. Give me a bit of an assessment. How well off economically were we at the end of the Bill Clinton presidency?
What's important in economics is to separate longer-term trends and short-term business cycles. So the economy goes up and down. When it's up and there are more jobs, we feel better. When it's down in a recession, we feel bad. But then there's a long-term trend. So I would distinguish these things. Towards the end of the Bill Clinton administration, we were in a kind of boom, and employment was high, and he left the presidency feeling, with Americans feeling, that's a good period. But if you look at the long term and what his administration represented, the longer term has been this steady widening of inequality, the lack of attention to that inequality. In fact, Bill Clinton signed the ending welfare as we know it, and I think that was a very cruel piece of legislation. That put a lot of poor women out on the streets to desperately find work, no care for their children, no real ability, no sense of help. So that was a negative, and he signed, of course, the financial deregulation. That was the whole game, which was the Wall Street Democratic Party game to allow Citigroup to become Citigroup and all of that, and that made another disaster. So one of the things that happened just after his boom was the bust of the dot-com bubble in 2001, and we could see that in that cycle, we were living in a bit of a bubble at the end of the Clinton years. But on the longer term, what really did he do from a public policy point of view to address inequality, to help the poor, to make our society more fair? To my point of view, very, very little. And so in that sense, I regard our modern era as having started, our modern political cycle as having started January 20, 1981, with Ronald Reagan coming in, attacking government, dismantling a lot of the great things that were developed and created in the 1960s, taking them apart. And when Bill Clinton became president, he continued that longer term process. He declared that the era of big government is over, so he played into the Reagan era.
Right.
And unfortunately, that has continued until today, with one exception, which I regard as modest, even though in our huge debate it's looms so large, and that is Obamacare, which is a plus. But actually, again, if you take a big picture, it's a relatively
Right.
small step. But it is a sign for America that a few tenths of a percent of our national income could lead to a firestorm of 7 or 8 years, because one side says, don't ever do anything remotely nice to any poor person. And the other one says, okay, I want to do something a little bit nice to a poor person.
Right.
That's the range of our debate in this country.
If somehow you could be placed in charge of the U.S. economy, you could bring the
Well, I do
parties
in my
together.
imagination all the time, you can imagine.
Good. Share some of that imagination. What would be the 2 or 3 of the first steps that you would take to try and set us on the right road?
I start by looking at places that I really like, and I get to visit them as part of my work. So if you go to, as I mentioned, Denmark or Norway or Sweden, there's no poverty, very high affluence, and by the way, everyone's gets long vacations. and if a woman is pregnant, she's going to get a maternity leave paid for several months. When she goes back to work, her child care is going to be covered. That, to my mind, is really civilized.
When she goes back to work, which means that the job is waiting for her.
And she's
when
going to
she
have a
gets
job
back
because
there.
it's high employment
Yeah.
and high participation in the labor force by women. Very, very civilized, and they trust the government, and corruption's low. Now, the Republicans and many people in America might be horrified. How do they do that? They actually pay a lot of taxes. And their idea is, we'll pay a lot of taxes, but then we'll get a lot of good services on the other side, because we want to live in a decent place. And we want to live in a place where every child, poor or rich, is going to have the same quality education, health care, child care. And you know what? It works. And once I had some minor thing that I had to step into a clinic in Sweden recently, into a hospital, and they did some minor thing, and I got out all my cards so that they could, no, this is all free, you know.
Wow.
Of course, it's not free in the economic sense.
Exactly.
It's paid for
Somebody has
by
to pay
taxes.
for it,
It's
right.
paid, but their candidates campaign saying, we will not cut your taxes. You know, it's the opposite. It's like a Twilight Zone version of American politics, because what they're really saying is, we will not cut your social benefits. You will live in a decent society where things work. Then my wife and I, we travel for work, for our efforts abroad in Africa and elsewhere. When we come back home, of course, our infrastructure is completely broken down. We often
wanted to
joke
get
at
to
each,
that, right.
joke at to each other that we know we're home when we arrive at Kennedy Airport or Newark and the escalator doesn't work and the elevator says that it's out of service and so forth. And as Americans, we're used to this, but when you travel abroad, it's not like that actually right now.
Right.
Infrastructure really works. Okay, so that's the preamble. I want to do more of what they do. I want to collect taxes from companies, from the rich. I want to be able to afford health care, child care, pre-K for everybody, not as a huge fight like we had between the governor and the mayor
Right.
of our own town, where Mayor de Blasio was absolutely right, but as a national absolute baseline. So infrastructure, job training, having an education system where you don't have $1 trillion of student debt, and not going to war every year, not
Right.
spending, we spent maybe $5 trillion if you add up Iraq, Afghanistan, the veterans' costs of wounded people in this country. And then we turn around and say, oh, we can't find a few $1 billion. Oh, there's no money left.
So just like we can't seem to get our act together when it comes to infrastructure, which would be a great source of good new jobs.
Absolutely. And nice infrastructure, by the way,
Exactly.
elevators that work.
which would be a platform, a new platform for American industry going forward. I mean, to me, it just seems like a win-win-win.
And Bob, we also have to change the infrastructure because of climate change. We need an energy supply that is not based on oil or gas or coal. It has to be based on wind and solar and hydropower. We need to modernize the energy system so we don't completely wreck the climate also.
Well, you anticipated my next question, which was why we can't seem to do anything. We don't even pay very close attention to climate change. Most Americans, I mean, if you talk about the concerns that they have, I mean, global warming, climate change is not very high on the list. What is our problem with regard to climate change? And if we could get past whatever that problem is, what is it we should be doing about it?
I think there's really one fundamental truth about our politics in this country, which is, by and large, the public's not the main problem. So on climate change, they may not put it at the top, but about 60 to 70% of Americans repeatedly have said we ought to address this. Gun control, same thing. Taxes on the rich, same thing.
Right.
Not going to war, same thing. Our biggest problem in this country is that public opinion doesn't translate into public action. And there are several barriers. One is that a lot of poor people don't vote, and if they did vote, we could make a different politics in this country. Of course, they're held back from voting by deliberate actions, also by phony kinds of abuses and suppressing the vote. But that's number one. Second, of course, is just the huge money in politics. This is going to be maybe a $10 billion federal election cycle. We legalized what in any other country would be the most corrupt, disgusting politics. We don't see it as corrupt and disgusting because it's called legal by the Supreme Court, but we have billionaires handing millions and millions of dollars to Hillary or to Donald Trump, and that's considered normal. And in fact, we're so twisted in this country that candidates are judged by their capacity to raise money. And that's a completely weird idea, by the way.
And so ordinary individuals, ordinary men and women, the voters of America, don't have the access that these folks with all this money do.
There's a fantastic study by Martin Gillens, who's a political scientist, one of the best in America. He wrote a book called Affluence and Influence. And he studied many, many policy issues. And he found out the only opinions that matter are of rich people.
Wow.
Because when you look at the actual outcome at the end of the day, at the end of the political debate, it's only the views of the rich that actually determine the outcome. So we don't need a different public. We, of course, need a better informed public and a more engaged public, but we do need a different politics.
We have to wrap it up there. I wish we had more time. Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. I look at the news today and I wonder what's happened to America. I'm not surprised at the racism or the violence that's always been with us. What astounds me is our unwillingness or inability to roll up our sleeves and do something real about the racism and the violence, or any of the other big challenges facing our society. Like children afraid of the dark, we tremble at the thought of terrorists lurking in every shadow. Rather than engage the many wonders of the world, we want to build a wall to keep the other out. Build a wall. We're the mightiest nation in the history of the world, and yet we can't keep our roads and bridges and airports and water systems in good repair. We can't even get a presidential nominee appointed to the Supreme Court. And forget about climate change. The thought of global warming just makes us dizzy. When did we become this shamefully fearful and helpless society? What happened to the nation that led the Allies to victory in World War II, that revitalized the economy of the European continent and created a standard of living here at home that no one had ever previously seen, that was able to send a man to the moon and bring him safely back home nearly half a century ago, long before there were such things as personal computers or the internet or cell phones? What happened to that nation? When did we pack up our limitless optimism and glorious dreams of the future and place them in cold storage? This is the United States of America I'm talking about. What happened to the bold, self-confident, idealistic vision that once defined the great promise of this nation? When did that wither? It's with a real sense of regret that I wonder, what happened to America? That's all for now. See you next time.